Thank you, everybody. I'm an interloper. I'm not an O and a G or a P. I'm not a doctor in your sense, although I do have a PhD. But since 2003, I've had a absolutely riveting involvement with the language and communication about pain, and more recently with the language of pelvic pain. It's a hidden epidemic, as speakers at this symposium have talked about. It's neglected and under-recognized and denied. And one of my students who's doing a PhD on bicultural pain and childbirth visited her own female physician with a series of the symptoms that we've heard about today. And this lay female doctor said, "Suck it up, shut up, that's what happens to women, go away and leave, stop bothering me." This shook me when I heard about it, and I made the appropriate introductions of that to someone who knew about these things. The student has begun the path back to rehabilitation. But this is a long-term problem, and very little information is available about it in areas which I deal with. And so, since 1 in 5 women is affected by this, I want to have a look with my colleagues at what's happening in the area. Now, pain is at least 2 things. First of all, it is what the person in pain is feeling. That is a subjective sensation, it's locked up inside them, and is very difficult, in spite of Wittgenstein and philosophical attempts, very difficult to get it out. But pain is also what is communicated, and I mean is with a, in capitals in red, it is what is communicated in words and body language and biomedical information. And in the triangulation between these, none of these works by itself, they feed off each other, and by putting them together, you can arrive at estimates of not only the existence, but also the nature, the periodicity, and the intensity of the person's pain. In 2015, an American court decided that fMRI information was appropriate for a claim for damages for pain in court. And eventually this settled out of court for a paltry sum of $800,000 US. But every pain specialist in the US got up and said, this is a bad idea. It's bad logic, it's bad medicine, it's bad use of a tool, and it does not give us what we need to know about pain. And in fact, in the journal Pain in 2015, Sullivan and Derbyshire came out with a statement which has stood since then. Self-report is the most complete and reliable access to another's pain. And that is what this paper is based on. There are 3 of us having a look at the language of pelvic pain. Susan Evans, Ellie, where are you? Ellie Schofield at the back, and I. And we're asking, is there a different language for female pelvic pain? In other words, can it be used for diagnostic and clinical purposes? Can language differentiate between different types of pelvic pain? Dan this morning used the word burning as one type of pain. That would be an interesting fact if we could describe it. And finally, can we improve communication between women and their health practitioner? I've got less to say about that today, and less about the kind of interpersonal language which is fundamental to setting your pain patients on the right path to management and recovery. But what we want to do is to look at the guts of the language itself and to see what is actually happening with pain descriptions. In an earlier study with one of our research students at the University of Queensland, we discovered that, and this was based on 230 healthy undergrads from the colleges whom we bribed with coffee and cake, that women use more words, more pain descriptors, more graphic language, and focused on the sensory aspects of pain, whereas the men were more likely to describe anger or to swear and to recall the event more objectively. So that there is already a bifurcation in terms of gender among young, healthy undergraduates who are otherwise a fairly homogeneous sample. This was interesting work because it carries on into all sorts of other things, including a lovely study from the University of Sheffield in 2009, which showed that the more you swear, the better you're able to undertake pain, and the worse you swear, the better your ability. I'm not going there today, although I'd love to. So in 2019, we set up a survey on SurveyMonkey to investigate women's pelvic pain stories. We had 6 types of pain: period pain, vulval pain, bladder pain, bowel pain, sex pain and other. And for each of those categories we asked, what does your pain feel like and what is its effect on your quality of life? And these were open text boxes. The people responding were asked to not to hold back, to let us know what they wanted us to feel and to understand. And it turned out to be an enormous story. In just over 2 months we had 1,034 respondents. Just Australia and New Zealand, which was an astonishing result. And they wrote nearly 300,000 words about their pain. That is probably about 5 novels. And so I have I'm like a pig in mud. I've got a lot of data to work out and to find out what's going on. And the responses varied from 1 word to 870 for a particular question on period pain. One lady, when asked what her period pain was like, said death. Another wrote 870 words. But as you'll see in a moment, these words were very sophisticated, expressive, sad, elaborate, and as a mere male, it tore me apart. So, our 1,034 women wrote about their pelvic pain, and here is an example of one part of one of the stories. I don't normally read text from PowerPoint screens, and by the way, I detest PowerPoint anyway, but never mind. Just listen to this. You need to soak it up and reflect on it. My period pain used to feel like heavy, rusty hooks tugging at the insides of my uterus and tearing the walls. This is great writing. They now feel like a massive explosion has gone off in my pelvis and continues to burn everything inside while my skin and muscles do their best to contain it. It's an astonishing remark. Beautifully put, exquisitely, painfully expressed. And so this is the kind of material we're working with to try and understand what's going on here and what these women are telling us. I took all of the 6 responses about what your pelvic pain feels like, in other words, from period pain, vulval pain, bladder and so on, and put them all together and then got a piece of software to rank them in order of frequency. And this is based on a very simple but well demonstrated phenomenon that if something is on your mind, you're going to talk about it more. And the more you talk about it, the more prominent it is in your attention. And this is a list of pain descriptors, the words people use to describe their pain. The most prominent word was sharp at the top, under this column here, beginning word, all right? And we go from there down through several hundred of these words. Second one was stabbing, the third was cramping, the fourth was ache, and the fifth was dull, and so on. And as you'll see in a moment, they form kind of categories and groups which allow us to start getting some idea of the most frequent words which your pelvic pain patients are likely to use. Interestingly, at number 6, we've got Dan's burning, which is right up there. But there are some holes. For example, look at cramping under vulva. There's a hole. Vulval pain does not involve cramping or cramps, which comes down a little bit further at position number 12. But you will see that there is a definite clustering, and the numbers under the various columns will tell you where each word was ranked in each particular type of pain. So sharp was one overall. In period pain, moving one column to the right, it was the 3rd most frequent, and it ranked as word number 21 in the list of all the words. Now, in a corpus of English of 14 billion words, which is held at Brigham Young University in Utah, they have done word counts, and with a database as large as that, you can be pretty confident that there are not going to be any confounding variables from particular biases of types of text. And of course, the most frequent words in English are the and a and of and in and by. In other words, articles, prepositions, and conjunctions. In the pain stuff, the word pain, which normally comes in at 800 and something, came in at number 4. And among the other words which were there, I and my were very frequent. These are personal texts talking about me and my possession of pain. As you go across, you'll find that sharp is the number 1 for vulva, number 1 for bowel, number 1 for bladder, number 1 for sex, and number 1 for other. In other words, this is overwhelmingly the most predominantly persuasive word about pelvic pain. Stabbing, reported in the literature by a number of people, but not that prominent, by the way, in the McGill Pain Questionnaire of 1975. Stabbing is number 2, cramping, ache and dull. A bit further down you'll come to, right at the bottom, throbbing. That's a more percussive type of repetitive pain. Shooting is more probably electric. There are some words which are hard to understand. But when you look at this, you will see how the first 5 words distribute across the major categories. Here we find that the yellow ones show you what's happened to the top 5 in different categories of pain. And of these, looking at the volumes of yellow in each column, you will find that, compared to the word one on the left, that period pain, vulval pain, and probably the other most atypical and closer together. But on the other hand, constant, which for some reason is down at quite low in the normal rank, is number 4 for other. Other is a difficult thing, it's mainly ovarian pain, by the way. But the others are somewhat displaced. Now, this starts to give us an idea, is there a coherent picture of pelvic pain in the way people talk about it? And we haven't yet got to the statistician, but it's beginning to look very much as if that is the case. Are there commonalities? Yes, the sorts of words that you find in these groups, and if you look at the rankings, the numbers on the left of the brackets in each case, you'll see that they do in fact form a pretty coherent area with some differences. The other thing that we did find, and this really surprised me a great deal, was the use of similes. You may remember from your school days that a simile is a word which uses like and as to make a comparison. My love is like a red, red rose, which is in the poetry of whom? Robbie Burns, the Scottish bard. We've got at least one Scot in the room. Come on, folks. All right. Now, the preposition like, no, her career is like a shooting star. The word like is followed by a noun or a noun phrase. A shooting star is a noun phrase, okay? When it's used as a conjunction, like I have been kicked in the crotch, this use of like is regarded grammatically as technically less correct, but is now increasingly common in English. What's the difference between simile and metaphor? Metaphors says X is Y. My love is a red, red rose. A simile, my life is like a red, red rose. So if you like, the metaphor squishes them together in one coherent and united concept. The other, if you like, just opposes 2 ideas and brings commonalities into one conceptual space. There is a difference. Why should you talk in similes? Well, you find very few similes in technical or objective or scholarly language. In other words, looking at the journals that we've seen discussed today, there will be very few similes in the technical language that they use. There will be almost none in public speech. Well, there will be some in public speech. There will be some in political rhetoric, but don't get me started. That's been a painful experience. But where you do find similes is particularly in poetry and in creative writing. From the point of view of the writer or the speaker, they are forms of being expressive. In other words, ordinary language has run out of juice and you're looking for something which will give an additional level or depth or resonance of meaning. From the point of view of the hearer or the reader, it's an evocative mechanism. The speaker or writer is communicating, if you like, an enhanced, uplifted expression, and they're arousing your emotions and understanding by making some comparisons which were not there before. There's a very famous definition, I think from the poet Pope, that these figures of speech are ideas, no, it's Johnson, roped by violence together. In other words, you get 2 things and drag them together and force people to consider what they like when you put them together. To shock or squeeze language to try and find additional levels of meaning. In everyday English, and this is the number from the 14 billion word corpus, the word like is the 78th most common word as a preposition. In other words, it's way behind articles, prepositions and conjunctions and pronouns, and it's even behind a few nouns like people and time. It's 78th. And as a conjunction, it's the 1459th. In other words, it's pretty much out of major contention. But in our survey, like was the 8th most common word across all pains except for vulval pain, where it was 4th. That suggests to me, and where this will take further investigation, that vulval pain is probably the most difficult to describe. And this, if you like, is an unexpected measure of that odd fact, and that it's somewhat more difficult than the other types of pain, which in turn are rather more difficult to describe than ordinary experience. And in order to give you a feel of what it's like, I have the screen. You may need to look at the closer ones closer to you, because I'm afraid it's a bit small. What you do is you put the text through a piece of software called a concordancer, and that builds an index of every word used in the text, together with all of the words used on either side. And I asked it to look at a sample of like. You will see that this is from the period pain one. It in fact is top left, 1,615 hits for like. But if you have a look at the like down, it puts like down the middle for convenience, and you can see the words to the right. You will see that there are certain patterns already starting to emerge. Like a heavy balloon, right, that's the idea of probably bloating. Brick, pressure, pulling, swollen, and weight in the next group, like a horse is standing on my belly. Now, all of these are images of weight and pressure, okay, of a particular type, but using different sorts of evocative language to try and capture it. The next group are more thermal, but they are combined with images of puncturing, okay, like the tip of a sharp knife. So a hot barb, a hot iron, a hot knife. Now this time we've got a blade rather than a tip. And look at some of these examples, like a hot poker being inserted into my anus. Ouch. Like a hot poker, again, several times. And this is, again, a similar image of over a number of different respondents. Going down, a hot rod on my spine, a huge cramp, a jackhammer. Okay, now this is percussive, hard, punctual sort of thing. And then a knife being stabbed and twisted. Okay? This is the sort of data we've got to work with, but the tools enable you, rather than having to read through nearly 300,000 words, immediately to get to some of the really nuts and bolts of how the texts are working. Our respondents are using similes like this to try and capture characteristics of pain, and these then match up with the words you saw a moment ago. Okay? The knife goes in with cutting and so on. The heavy words come together with cramping and what have you. This is a really valuable resource. No one's seen anything like this before, except at Pain Adelaide a couple of months ago when I showed an even earlier version of this. And among the words, we then start to develop a profile of the grammar of pain talk. The most simple one is pain is an adjective, pain is a noun, pain is a knife, whatever. Pain is so excruciating, and there are literally tens of thousands of those. But, as I've shown you, pain plus simile is also not only common, but also enormously more common than in ordinary English writing or speech. Ovulation pain is like someone stabbing you with a hot skewer. A horrible sort of sensation which to males is rather difficult to imagine. Here's a metaphor. Pain is stabbing mainly to my right ovary. Not like stabbing, but pain is stabbing. This actually is, as it were, penetrating my right ovary. Pain as a malevolent agent. This is important because you can think of pain as, remember Nietzsche said that it was a black dog, something which was haunting him, pursuing him, harrying him. He couldn't get away from it. Pain as a malevolent agent suggests that it's something which is actually almost personified, acting on you in a way which is designed to cause you misery, pain and discomfort. So, mounting waves of pain that left me gasping for breath. Normally, an abstract like pain would not cause gasping in the same way. A lot of our respondents used multiple words, sometimes 6 adjectives or more to describe a particular pain they were trying to capture from different angles. Stabbing, cramping, pulling, throbbing, contracting. Now, some of these are The contracting idea is the cramping thought, all right? But stabbing is a punctual thing from a sharp object, probably metal. And pulling and throbbing are again different. Pulling is a tension thing. Throbbing is probably a repeated rhythmical thing like a migraine. And finally, and this is important too, subjects presented themselves very often as passive pain sufferers. In other words, rather than I have a pain and I hate it, which makes that, I am the person, if you like, and I'm suffering it, but I'm an active member in this sentence. By being passive, by being jabbed by a cattle prod, in other words, there's something out there, it's an instrument, I am the helpless victim of this thing and it's doing it to me. Okay? And you will find that as your patients talk to you, this passive expression is very common, right, accompanied by the sort of words that I've gone through. It's like electricity going down my thigh. That picks up yet another element of the pain experience. So you see that this material is unbelievably rich. It offers the possibility of maybe producing, if you like, a clinical check sheet, but certainly a clinical profile of both pelvic pain as a group and pelvic pains, all right, as plural. What we've learned from this so far, first of all, the women were incredibly generous with their time. The average time taken to complete our survey was 22 minutes. Now, some of them, of course, whipped through the early questions. How old were you when your period started? When did your period pain start becoming regular every month, and so on? When did it move from being period pain to general pain? They zipped through that and then stopped. But the ones who kept going very richly and generously. They urgently needed to talk and to be heard, and obviously for a number of these respondents, this exercise was itself cathartic. They were unloading something which had been pent up and waiting to get out, and by expressing this in such abundance and such richness, and sometimes in such bitter terms. There were some comments about doctors which they felt had neglected them, sent them away, treated them badly. Many of them had been doctor hopping for decades. It was a cathartic experience. But there was also a sense of community of women in pain, that they belonged to a group of people who had a shared purpose, and they were delighted to find that a group of people, the three of us, particularly one professional pain physician, wanted to hear from them and was willing to listen. So, from this point of view, I think it can be said that the use of language actually validates pelvic pain. In other words, it's not just go away, suck it up, it's something that happens to women. It has a name, and we're going to give it capital letters, like chronic regional pain syndrome. It has capital letters, it exists, it's an entity, and it's something which can be addressed as something which should have a medical existence on its own right. And that the types of pelvic pain are not just somatically defined by the physical areas of the body where they occur or by their neurology, but also by the way in which they are communicated by patients to physicians and by patients to the people who have to live with them. This process of reification is important. Reification is a word from Latin res, which means a thing, and it means that by giving it a name, you give it an established existence. In other words, it is not something which is just in your head, which is biologically or neurobiologically correct, but potentially also denigrating. This is something which actually does exist. And by describing it in such copious and precise terms, we have a way of tying it down and, if you like, consolidating some of your professional practice in terms of the other things that you do. We've got a mountain of data to analyse, and all sorts of things are going to come out of this, including, I think, some studies from a linguistic point of view about the use of similes for purposes that other people hadn't anticipated, but also leading on to the interpersonal study of pain language between patients and physicians. It's been suggested that we do a men's pelvic pain survey. Having heard the paper this morning, I would be very interested in pursuing that, although I think we would have rather greater difficulty in accessing groups of men with pelvic pain. I do a lot of talks to men's sheds. I cannot imagine them writing 870 words about their pain. Or at least they'd probably use words that one would not necessarily want to print. But from my point of view as a linguist, the opportunity now opens up to look at this type of material in other languages and cultures. We already know from the earlier study that men and women talk differently about pain in English. And there are differences between people of different ages, and there are differences between people of different education, of vocabulary differences. If you have someone who turns up with a broken leg from a building site and you say, "My dear fellow, have you got a lancinating pain?" which is what the McGill pain questionnaire would have you ask, then you will probably evoke a response which you hadn't anticipated. But there are constraints, taboos on pain talk in other cultures. Confucian cultures through most of Asia are such that one doesn't talk about pain readily to other people, and in particular women don't talk about their pain, especially in the presence of men. There are ways in which these things are regarded as private experiences which should not be dumped on the broader companion of people around. So I will be looking to see the ways in which our results from this survey are mirrored in other cultures and whether they actually line up with the readiness of people to talk about pain or not, and the ways in which they will allow themselves to be engaged in pain discourses. The women's words that we've collected are an enormous store of wisdom. No one's ever done something like this before, and I, in particular, am learning how to listen to what they are telling us. This is a marvellous graphic, I love it. And so that is the very first report on the full data set that we've got. It's a very early look at what we've got, and I hope that maybe next year I'll have some very much more precise and maybe more clinical things to say to you as well. Thank you.